Picture this. 480 Marines pinned down in hostile terrain, ammunition running low. The flashes of enemy muzzles illuminate every hill. Command is already drafting the casualty list. Protocols dictated, "Hold the line," doctrine said, "Fall back." But in that moment, when waiting became a death sentence, one overlooked pilot refused to follow the script. This is the story of Captain Maya Thorne, a pilot they considered expendable, who took the stick and brought a battalion home alive. Before we begin, leave a comment. Where are you watching from? It's always great to see our military family spread across the map. The sun burned through the flight line, dust working its way into every seam of gear. In the mess hall, laughter echoed off the concrete. Marines loaded their body armor, keeping things light before another patrol. But beyond the trays and the jokes, one figure sat alone, legs crossed on a tarp, flight helmet beside her and a kneeboard on her lap. 27-year-old Captain Maya Thorne, an A-10 Warthog pilot, moved with mechanical precision, every motion deliberate, measured, and unhurried. Shorter than most, standing just over 5 feet, she fit into the cockpit like she belonged there. Where others flaunted swagger, she radiated control, running checklists, reviewing weapon system displays, scribbling setup notes on her kneeboard. Her Warthog wasn't just a jet. It was an extension of her focus. She recorded every metric like scripture. Gun harmonics at different speeds, pylon configurations, recoil patterns, exactly how the Gu-8 breathed on a sweltering day. 2 junior corporals walked past toward the barracks, grinning like they owned the asphalt. "There's the quota pilot," one muttered, loud enough to cut through the generator hum. "Paper pilot," the other snorted. Lucky for her, cardboard doesn't pull triggers. They didn't slow down. They didn't expect a response. Maya didn't look up. She ran through her checklist and jotted down another line. She had heard it all before. Dead weight, mascot, checkbox. Too small, too quiet, too different. Even hardened sergeants on their third tours treated her like an administrative asset. Thorne's great in the simulator. One had told the operations officer, "Keep her in support. Let her run comms." So they did. Logistics, supply drops, radio checks. Nobody sent her up the ridges. Nobody asked her to take the Warthog into a real fight. She was politely told to stay out of the way. What they never understood, because they never bothered to look, was that Maya Thorne was running her own flight program in the quiet dead of night. While the others traded stories in the smoke pit, she spread out aeronautical maps under a red penlight, memorizing the terrain and canyons of Kestrel Valley until the topography was etched in her mind. She tracked wind vectors and updrafts, noting how the gusts shifted across different valleys at different hours. She ran simulated gunnery runs until her inputs were as steady as a metronome. And on her little green kneeboard, she wrote it all down. Gunnery tables, pylon drag, fuel consumption, all calculated by hand in case of an avionics failure. Every page was covered in neat handwriting, columns of numbers, and intersecting arrows. It was her own personal doctrine, invisible to the men convinced she had none. Beneath the sleeve of her flight suit rested a small tattoo, pilot's wings with a tiny warthog silhouette. She had earned everything through sweat and precision at a flight school that punished hesitation and demanded perfection. But here, near Kestrel Valley, she kept her sleeves rolled down. There was no need to remind the men who were already certain she didn't belong. That was the paradox of Maya Thorne. She never flared up when mocked, never argued when sidelined, never threw words back to prove her worth. She carried the insults as quietly and systematically as she carried her aircraft's checklists. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was waiting for the inevitable moment when all her maps, numbers, and discipline would no longer be invisible. Her story didn't start near Kestrel Valley. It started in Red Dust, Nevada, where the evenings smelled of dry earth and the horizon stretched infinitely over the brush. Her father, a Marine who served 2 combat tours before injuries forced him out, trained her with rigid discipline even when he was hundreds of miles away. He worked exactly at dawn, repaired fences before breakfast, and at sunset, lined up soda cans on posts, handing her a battered hunting rifle. "Breathe steady," he would say. Ease the trigger. Let the shot surprise you. By 12, she could knock down any can at 50 yards. By 16, she outshot most of the grown men who came through to hunt. When he passed away during her senior year, Maya enlisted, partly to honor him, partly to prove she could carry the weight he had etched into her bones. She took that discipline into aviation training and earned an A-10 slot, an achievement few managed and fewer acknowledged. But out in the field, paper credentials meant little against opinions already cast in stone. The compound itself was a bubble of routine. Patrols rolled out. Reports trickled back. Marines lined up for chow. Briefings recycled the same clipped buzzwords. Thorne drifted at the edges, noticed but entirely undervalued. Then the orders came. A sweep. 480 Marines, attachments included, were tasked with clearing Kestrel Valley, which intel claimed was lightly defended. On paper it looked routine: secure, clear, stabilize. Command sold it as simple. Sitting in the back of the briefing, notebook balanced on her thigh, Maya read the terrain differently. The contour lines screamed danger. Tight approaches, high ground on 3 sides. Kill zones waiting to be lit up. She raised her hand, steady as ever. "Sir, have we considered this valley could be a deliberate trap? These folds over here," she pointed at the projection. "They could hide a heavy element. It looks too neat." Colonel Strickland, leading the briefing, barely glanced up. "Captain, you track equipment, not strategy. That's above your pay grade." Chuckles rolled through the room. "Dead-weight pilot talking tactics," someone muttered. Maya shut her notebook and kept quiet. The Marines slung their rifles, adjusted their helmets, and joked about how fast the sweep would go. 480 strong, moving by doctrine, brimming with confidence, untouched by doubt. She stayed behind, assigned to support duty once again. Her task: monitor comms, track supply runs, stay clear of operations. But as the dust from the departing convoys drifted across the compound, Maya felt the weight of every coordinate she'd logged, every line she'd traced under the red light. She had envisioned Kestrel Valley long before the orders dropped. She knew exactly how its jaws could snap shut. The next morning, the tactics room buzzed with bravado. Colonel Strickland dragged a laser pointer across the terrain. Ridges and routes that looked clean on the screen were brutal in reality. When he paused, Maya lifted her hand again. "Sir, the valley forms intersecting fields of fire. Machine guns on the spurs, RPG teams in the draw, and our convoys will be pinned inside a bowl." Strickland glanced at her name tape. "You're here to manage radios, Captain." Laughter stirred again. A private mimed scribbling notes and winked at a buddy. Maya's fingers pressed tightly around her kneeboard, then eased. Out on the flight line the next day, crosswinds slid left to right. Maya strapped in, narrowed her world to the reticle and heat, and dialed in her adjustments. Inhale, exhale. The GU-8 barked, steady and merciless. "Luck," a young private muttered when the steel targets jumped. A gunnery sergeant spat in the dust. "Pylons don't shoot back," he drawled. She logged each burst out of habit. Later, during a base patrol, 2 SEALs strolled past. A few Marines from Maya's unit leaned near a Humvee. "Dead weight," one announced. "Never seen a pilot so scared to fly combat." One SEAL smirked. Maya finished her radio check, logged the serial, and walked on. Meanwhile, 480 Marines pushed deep into Kestrel Valley. For a while, the radios ticked with routine traffic. Fuel tallies, position checks. Drone feeds showed the convoy crawling along a dirt road, heat shimmer warping the screen. Then the rhythm broke. One check-in never came. Then 2 voices overlapped, frayed with panic. Someone called for dismounts. Then came the sound you hear once and never forget. The break in a man's voice when the world around him explodes. "Contact! Contact!" Static swallowed the rest. Another net cut in. "Taking heavy fire. East Ridge." The feed bloomed with thermal signatures. Muzzle flashes stitched across the hills. The convoy bunched up and froze. In the command center, the watch officer lowered his headset, staring dead ahead at the screens. A lieutenant grabbed a checklist, skimming frantically. finding no protocol for a slaughter. Hold position. Wait, follow protocol, the major said, clinging to the script. Too hot inside 200 meters. No air support. Captain nodded rapidly. Rules are clear. We hold outside the bubble. On a side monitor, a helmet cam showed dust and grass. The horizon heaved with the Marine's panicked breathing. Rounds chewed the dirt near his boots. Maya edged closer to the back rail, her eyes locked on a drone angle showing the crown of a gun pit on the eastern spur. She counted the bursts, mapped the enemy's traverse in her head, and read the wind by how the smoke drifted. Colonel Strickland asked for options. The major quoted the manual again. We need them to bound out of the ring. Then we can drop steel. They can't bound, a captain admitted quietly. Then they hold, the major answered. The room fell into a nervous hush. The men who had laughed hours ago now kept their hands busy, staring at the screens. Maya laid her palm on the leather of her flight jacket. Nobody's asking for ordnance, Maya said evenly. A cannon pass will do. Strickland turned just enough to acknowledge her. We are not authorizing anything that violates the 200-meter danger close rule. It's not about authorization, she fired back. It's geometry. Give me a position and time, and I'll cut their anchors without scratching ours. You'll solve a battalion fight with a cockpit opinion, Captain? A captain barked. Stay in your lane. Lance Corporal Brody called from the doorway. The radio shrieked with flattened syllables from men on the edge of getting overrun. A squad leader's voice cracked. Command, this is Bravo. We are pinned. Casualties mounting. We cannot push. We cannot pull back. We need. The drone swung back, catching the eastern gun pit laying down fire. The dust coughed from the enemy muzzle. Maya knew the pauses between the bursts. She unzipped her kit. I can end this, she murmured, cycling the Warthog's cannon check in her head, snapping on her flight gloves. Captain, where are you going? The first sergeant barked. Out, she answered. The 200-meter rule stands, Strickland repeated like a prayer. Maya didn't wait. She walked out of the command center, helmet under her arm, jaw set like iron. She moved through the compound like a shadow. Her boots hit the concrete with a steady rhythm. At the flight line, she checked the Warthog's loadout. Pylons secure. Cannon harmonics green. She strapped in. The climb to her Overwatch altitude felt brutal. The engine spooled, the A-10 tugging at the throttle as she threaded a low-energy climb. She hugged the terrain, flying the profile she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. From above, Kestrel Valley looked like an open wound. Transports burned. Muzzle flashes stitched the ridges. Maya eased the stick, settled the HUD on a gun pit 900 meters out, and let the world collapse into sensors and sights. The GU-8 whispered through the airframe. A singular, deafening burst spat into the gully. The enemy gunner crumpled. The valley went dead silent for a fraction of a second. Radios exploded. Who's shooting? Do we have air cover? Negative. No SAS cleared. She didn't answer. She slotted a rocket, slung a precise targeting solution, and rolled for her next attack. An RPG team was setting up 70 meters from a pinned squad. She measured the arc and wind drift, punched the ordnance, and the launcher vaporized before the crew could fire. The screaming net turned to stunned shouts. What the hell? Who's covering us? Maya kept the jet flat and low, melding with the shadows of the ridgeline. Every pass was surgical. She wasn't just tallying kills. She was cutting the threads of the ambush. An enemy command node collapsed. A machine gunner jerked back from his tripod. With every pass, the kill box frayed. This isn't artillery, someone yelled over the net. This is a gunship. Who's got Overwatch? Maya's sleeves snagged on jagged metal as she adjusted the trim, exposing the pilot's wings tattooed on her forearm. Scars flashed in the cockpit light. She calculated lead and executed without hesitation. A lieutenant on the ground yelled, "We've got a ghost on Overwatch." Then a grizzled voice cut into the net. Commander Vance, the SEAL commander attached to the battalion, barked a demand. "Who the hell is covering us?" Maya stayed off the net. But a comms tech back at base, pulling registry data, whispered into the radio, "Wraith 404. The net froze. Vance's tone shifted, suspicion melting into shock. "Wait, Wraith 404? That's Maya Thorne." A beat of absolute disbelief followed. "No way. The deadweight pilot is Wraith 404? The name Wraith 404 wasn't a joke. It was a legend from training, tied to impossible low-altitude runs and terrifying accuracy. Back in the command post, Colonel Strickland went rigid, watching the flickering Warthog silhouette tear the ambush apart on his monitors. The administrative pilot they had benched was now the only thing keeping his men alive. Maya ignored the chatter. She just lined up pass after pass, tearing open seams where enemy walls had stood. What had felt like a coffin hours earlier now shook with rotor thunder as medevac helicopters dropped into the corridor she had carved. Marines sprinted toward the LZs, dragging wounded, covering with their last magazines. She held her orbit low, cutting down threats with cold patience. "First chalk is up. Wounded aboard." The radio crackled. "Corridor holding. Command. This is Trident Actual." Commander Vance's voice echoed. "Wraith 404 has us covered." "Repeat. Wraith 404 has us covered." Her call sign surged through the network. Panic dropped out of men's voices. When the final squad checked in, Vance exhaled into the comms. "All 480 accounted for. 0 left behind. 0 left behind." An outcome no one thought possible. Only when the last helicopter lifted skyward did Maya ease back on the stick and flick the weapon safeties on. Taxiing back to the apron was heavy with exhaustion. By the time her Warthog rolled to a stop, helicopters were already offloading the battered Marines. Dust coated the base in bone gray, but as she climbed down, the atmosphere had shifted. Marines lined the tarmac, helmets tucked under their arms. Men who had smirked in the mess hall now stood at attention, shoulders squared. At the far end stood Colonel Strickland, his jaw locked tight. When she stopped before him, the silence was absolute. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said, his voice sharp. "Yes, sir." The pause stretched. Then, Strickland's voice softened slightly under the weight of it all. "You saved a battalion." Before she could respond, Commander Vance stepped forward, covered in grime and blood. He raised his hand in a sharp, heavy salute. "Wraith 404, he said reverently. "The valley owes you." Behind him, the stillness broke. Boots stomped against the tarmac. Hands clapped. The murmured applause of warriors honoring something greater than themselves rolled over the flight line. Maya didn't gloat. She simply lowered her eyes. "I was just doing my duty, sir." She walked back to the hangar to log her engine burns and cannon bursts, her father's dog tags tapping quietly against her chest. But outside those walls, everything had changed. The officers who had dismissed her would never ignore her again. And for the battalion, the story of Kestrel Valley would live on. Not as a massacre, but as the day Wraith 404 watched over them. True courage doesn't always roar. Often, it waits. Quiet, steady, unseen, until the moment it's needed. And when it arrives, it simply does its duty, changing history in the process. One overlooked pilot refused to let a foolish protocol bury 480 Marines. Captain Maya Thorne proved that discipline outlasts doubt. If the story moved you, honor her resolve in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from today, and make sure to follow the Veterans Chronicles, because tales of duty, valor, and sacrifice must never be forgotten. Your voice keeps their legacy alive.